Welcome to Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to the people shaping the world of cybersecurity today and find out a little bit about their journey, the events that have shaped their careers, and what still keeps them up at night. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dustin Haywood, better known to most of us as Evil Mog. Dustin is Executive Managing Hacker and Senior Technical Staff Member at X-Force, IBM's Hacking, Incident Response and Threat Intelligence Division. He's also well known as a member of Team Hashcat, who have dominated the major cracking competitions for the past 15 or so years. With over 20 years' experience, multiple lifetime Black Badge Award passes to major hacker conferences, and even the occasional appearance as the Bishop of the Church of Wi-Fi, Dustin's passion for cybersecurity, especially in authentication and password security research, clearly extends far beyond his role at IBM. So Dustin, thank you very much for joining us today, and a long overdue welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I hear great things.
Well, that's a good start then. Let's jump in actually with your early origin stories, because with a hacker handle like Evil Mog, which most people know you by, there's got to be a cool origin story behind that. So, when did you first become interested in technology and think this is the thing I want to be spending my life doing?
So I started off in technology at a very young age. It actually stems from the fact that I couldn't handwrite to save my life when I was young. So Mom stole an old telex machine from work when they were getting rid of them because we couldn't afford a real decent computer. So that's why I got into early typing. I got a 386 a little bit later than that. Eventually moved up to the dial-up days back in the 90s, just the way of banging out reports. I then got out of technology for a bit. I wound up as a telemarketer for a touch. Somehow wound up going back to school, became a network technician. Wound up in Afghanistan, of all places, hooking up satellites and communications towers. In fact, that was recently in a different podcast. I was telling that story. From there, I wound up looking for a job after I left the sandbox. Wound up getting picked up by a government-owned bank after doing some time in the NOC and a few other places. I asked them why were they hiring me as a cybersecurity guy when I'd never touched security. They're like, well, hey, you can configure a firewall in your sleep. You can do networking. That's all the stuff is. We need someone who can build something today. I'll deal with load balancers. I'm like, all right, whatever. I'll get involved in this. Started off as a SIM analyst. And then we had to do an Active Directory password assessment. So I'm like, well, this looks kind of cool. I'm decent with math. And at the time, the options were basically John the Ripper, and Hashcat was in early beta, required a beta key to even access it. And so I went out, we built ourselves the small GPU box. The old Radeon 7970s at the time were in vogue. And I got hooked up with the Hashcat team because I was on the IRC routinely asking questions. And I started answering support questions for them. So they invited me to go take part in their contests. From there, working for the bank, I started building larger GPU clusters until so I needed the handle. And so I went to this little conference called DerbyCon back in the day. And I met I was going by my gamer tag at the time of Mog, which was oddly enough the first glider I ever flew. CF Mike Oscar Golf. Might have been CG Mike Oscar Golf. Either or, I ran into a guy named Matthew O'Gorman who had the same initials. And we agreed because he had the initials, we should probably do a deconfliction. And so because, the joke was I was on the blue team. I'm like, I'll be evil, just make this funny to throw people off. So I became Evil Mog. He became Good Mog. And then my company at the time we were a government-owned bank, didn't want people doing research under their real names. So they're like, hey, do it under a handle. And then eventually my name got leaked. My name, my cluster size, my company got leaked at a Usenix 2015 talk, measuring real-world probabilities of password cracking, which was kind of intentional because I was tired of doing it under a smoke screen. And so I became Evil Mog to the outside world. Then eventually IBM stole me, and it's been research after research after research, and now here we are today.
And I believe actually at IBM, you've managed to socially engineer that Evil Mog at IBM. So you've used that handle, and that's now embedded very much within IBM as your identity.
Oh, it's embedded in almost every systems identity. It's embedded in like a lot of our paperwork and processes, all of our marketing materials. It's been an 8-year-long social engineering op. At one point, Ginny Rometty, the old CEO, had to ask a senior VP what an Evil Mog was after I ninja'd her some shirts at CBIT. It was a very funny moment.
How did that actually start off at IBM then? What was your initial objective? Were you just, I want the email address, or you just wanted to
Yeah, I
just...
wanted the email address initially, and they hired me on to go build a cluster. So they started doing it in early marketing terms. So we figured, I met up with my old boss at the time, said, how far can we take this? And so it just literally started getting embedded literally everything. And I kind of started a movement where people went by their hacker handles, because IBM was known for being very button up, stiff shirt.
Sure.
So X-Force was this group of hackers that we brought on board to see, let's go change the culture of IBM from the inside out. And there really is a cool, innovative culture that we've built up that's been permeating and infecting the rest of IBM to the point now where other groups are copying us and improving. And it's actually really cool.
I did hear you on another podcast say something along the lines of, if I ever left IBM, but that's never going to happen. I'll never do it, kind of thing. What is it there about the culture that, you've obviously been a part of building that makes it such a great place for you to be?
Well, it's really the people and the talent. We've been shielded from a large amount of the bureaucracy in an attempt to change IBM from the inside out. And we've been hiring all these amazing hackers. So every day I'm surrounded by people far smarter than me, and I'm learning. They say if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, right now, I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. There are far more smarter people than me. And the exploits we come up with on a daily basis is just absolutely staggering. I've never want to leave here.
And in terms of those social engineering, you're talking about kind of hacking the culture from the inside and building this thing. What pushback did you get from kind of maybe the old guard, maybe the buttoned up shirts that people think of when they think about IBM, when you're trying to go out and, inject the evil mog into all the email addresses and the names and everything as you go?
Well, certain groups are always very process driven, right? And the innovation kind of slowed down a little bit. But now it's like the whole AI boom, and IBM has this massive research division. So the research groups are always very much all about, hey, we're all on board with this. Some of the older business processes were a little bit slow to catch on. So we told them, look, we're an independent testing group. We are organizationally independent from the rest of IBM. We're immune from most of the processes, because we are operating outside of the environments to go test you like an attacker would. So we're completely independent, unbiased, and we're here to tell you what's actually going on. And then they realized, well, we're actually here to help, and clients absolutely love us. So we get brought into deals, we get brought into other accounts saying, look, you might have had some issues with certain things in the past. We're here to make things better. And people saw that we're massive agents for change, and it's just been awesome ever since.
And just digging into some of the things that led you to be in the role you're at and, sort of shaping the way the things are working there at IBM. You mentioned one of the earlier things you did was telemarketing and sales. That's a job that is not the easiest job in the world, and is a job that a lot of people would actively avoid. So what led you down that path, and what was it that you learned that you then taken forward in your career from that experience?
So before I got to telemarketing, I was having problems getting jobs. Living in a small town just north of Calgary, it was a little bit rough. Technology wasn't exactly a thing, and I wanted to learn about phone systems at the time because I was big into freaking. So I was like, let's go apply at my local telephone company. And so I wound up working for one of the larger telco carriers. And the only options that were available at the time were evening shift telemarketing, then eventually day shift telemarketing. What it gave me access to was their entire learning catalog. And so I could get into things like, here's how the phone switches work, here's how the networking pieces work, here's all that works. And the only reason I really left that job was the union went on strike, everyone left. So I decided, let's go back to school. That's why I got into networking in the first place. I used all the technology I'd learned from the telemarketing roles, because we'd also eventually get into, here's how you provision ADSL, here's how you provision the phone switch in the background, here's how you program those. So I'd already gotten exposure to a lot of that telco technology, which came in handy as a network engineer.
And what was it that attracted you? You mentioned freaking there, and we've had quite a few guests on who are, quite instrumental in the freaking scene. What was it about that was of interest to you at the time?
So it's funny. I grew up in rural BC for a little bit. I spent my teenage years out there, and so we get these phone books, and the phone books that would have these IVR quiz type challenges, mazes, etc. I'd look forward to the new ones coming out every week, and that became my only real way of entertainment, because all we had was dial up. I didn't get broadband until my mid-20s because it wasn't available in my town, and so the phone was the gateway to the internet. So everything to do with phone technology was my world at the time.
That's a really interesting one. We've had quite a few people with those rural backgrounds, and it was kind of that gateway to the world, and it opened their eyes, and that was the real point of interest then. So the union goes on strike, you're out the telemarketing, you decide to retrain. How do you then find yourself installing satellite links and networking in Afghanistan?
So it was funny. I started off at IBM's NOC, did 9 months in their NOC, and then I wound up taking up a big box retailer job to go replace a bunch of routers and switches all across Western Canada. And I was just looking for another gig. And I was looking at one of the job sites at the time, and this posting pops up for we need SAT techs in Afghanistan. And all you need is your CCNA and a willingness to work in austere environments. And I'm like, well, I need to go pay off a little bit of debt, so let's go deploy. Now, I'd previously been a reserve officer in the Canadian Forces, teaching kids to fly gliders. More specifically, I was a glider familiarization pilot. So, air cadets ages 12 to 19 would come out to the gliding zone, and I'd take them around for the first flight because I got my license back when I was 18 through the air cadet program. But I just released from the program because I was, I, I was kind of tired of the whole system. But yeah, I had that mild military affiliation. Family was all military, like grandfather, both sides. Like, this looks cool. I want to go do something useful. Like, I remember when, 9/11 hit, I woke up by my mom while I was working at Radio Shack, and she's like, dude, the Twin Towers had just fallen. And I'm like, what the heck? etc. So I'm like, I wanted to go do something. And this little company, Network Innovations, ran the Canadian Morale Voice and Internet services. So basically, every time a soldier called their family back home, it was my job to go set up the system. So I didn't know satellite at the time. I knew networking, but they'd hired a guy fresh out of the Canadian Forces. He was the foreman of the Joint Signals Regiment. Hey, you can go run the system. Here's this kid who knows networking inside and out, who's green but willing to go out in the field. You two go do some damage, and it worked out well.
And what was the experience like? Was it just completely thrown in at the deep end, and you were largely on your own, or were you deployed as part of a larger team and you were learning a lot?
It was a team of two of us. I got a week of training while I was in there by the team that was rotating out. So you rotate 6 months in, 6 months out. And then I extended for another 6 months while I was in theater. So I did a 12-month continuous stint, home for maybe about a month. Started off work at the base, and then as stuff started dying out in the field, it was hop on a convoy, get in a helicopter, go repair the problem, and then hightail it back out of there, back to base, and do your thing. It was enlightening. Try to run wireless for it's called 1,000+ people on a base with only 6 megs of internet coming down via the sat feed. You have to packet shape the heck out of everything in order to make it all work. We even had video via Hamburg video teleconference working somehow. The problem is the latency is about 1,200 milliseconds round trip on that. You have to buffer that by 200 milliseconds because we had a couple hundred milliseconds of jitters. So it was like one-way simplex communications on the video feeds, but it worked.
And I mean, I'm assuming if you can go out into those environments, deal with the limitations of the resources and the constraints and all the things you're doing, that puts you in a pretty good place for continuing a career in kind of cybersecurity research and actually incident response and dealing with things that literally can be on fire at points.
Well, and that's exactly it. And I've dealt with data centers that were on fire. I mean, at the government bank, it was funny. I was at an event called Calgary Stampede. It's the big giant cowboy party where the entire city goes full out party mode. And there's vendor events left, right, and center. It's like Black Hat. It's kind of crazy in that regard. Everyone at this one event had gotten a phone call one day. We all put down our cell phones, race out of downtown. The vendor's like, what just happened? Like, well, this data center we're all out of is literally on fire. So we have to go migrate all our stuff off of it. It was a rather enlightening event. So I've dealt with everything from data center relocations, floods, fires, campus moves, all as the cybersecurity guy because we touch the firewalls, we touch the authentication, we act as shadow IT half the time in the environment. So it's been a very varied career.
So, I mean, just drilling in on, you've mentioned fire and floods here. So let's go with kind of the biblical instance in data centers that you've dealt with. At the time, was there a response plan in place for that? Or was this just a case of we'll just work out what we need to do and wing it as we go?
we'll just wing it as we go. I mean, there's the thing, you can only plan for so much, but like 100-year flood coming up to your data center doors and having to go sandbag a data center, like that's no one's job description. You just have to go sort it out. Same with, losing your entire primary data center due to a fire. There's no real recovery other than call your vendors, get your stuff shipped, have your backup tapes shipped from your backup location, all hands on deck, build and deploy. I was joking with my boss the other day. I'm terrible in the preparation phase of the world, but the second the boom hits and all hands on deck, like I'm the calmest because I'm no longer worrying about the disaster happening. It's just act, recover.
That's just something that comes very naturally to you, or is that something, a skill you think you've built up over time?
I think I've probably learned that over time. I've been exposed to enough incidents that they're basically old hat now at this point. Like, I've been in enough war rooms. I mean, heck, I once had to open a severity 1 ticket on a coffee machine outage during a core banking cutover go live. Everyone was working 18-hour days during this product launch, and the main office coffee machine just went down. Everyone was freaking out trying to line up Starbucks runs. I'm like, I know the facility member's primary phone number. I'm going to call the guy out of bed. I'm going to start up a war room. This coffee machine will be online in less than 2 hours. It was about 4, but it wound up working out. But I convened the entire trouble ticket process, called change management, like literally, got everyone lined up around this coffee machine, and we still went live and the coffee kept flowing.
So aside from keeping the coffee flowing during a crisis situation, like if someone, listening to podcast suddenly finds themselves thrown in, hopefully they're not dealing with floods, fire, or coffee outages, but what's your advice to someone who's never had to be in that situation before? How should they start to, rationalize things and break them down?
Most important thing is stop, take a deep breath, do some breathing exercises, go grab a coffee if you have to. There's no problem in IT that can't wait 15 minutes. During the first instances of an outage, your body's going to produce the stress hormone, cortisol. Cortisol causes confirmation bias. And that confirmation bias will make the problem worse if you make the wrong choice. Just stop. Even if lives are on the line, even doctors take a few moments to breathe for a couple of seconds before they go on in. Just breathe. Everything's going to be okay. Follow the process, work the problem. The calmer you are, the calmer everybody else is, the quicker things get resolved.
I mean, that's great advice, because it's the natural reaction to try and immediately start doing things. And if you do the wrong thing, or even if it's unintentional, you can actually make a situation far worse by doing that. I believe that you actually, not that you deliberately made the situation worse, but I believe you accidentally shut down an oil and gas facility once, or triggered a panic there.
Yes.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that happened and how you dealt with that situation.
Oh, that was I honestly thought I was going to get fired. That was the most heart-dropping moment. So I was doing a penetration test for an oil and gas company, and they swore up and down that there was no SCADA OT connected to their corporate environment. Now, experience now tells me that's a lie. So what happened was I'd compromised their Active Directory, and I was scanning for additional sites. So I, NS looked their entire list, or I extracted the list of computer accounts from the Active Directory, sliced off the $, added on their .domain name, NS looked up all the domain names, and then nmapped all those addresses after cutting the first 3 octets, do a .0, then a /24, and map the environment. Now they did vulnerable to Cisco Smart Install, so I was scanning for additional Smart Install. Now, the mere act of scanning for the Smart Install crashed this one industrial control switch, which I didn't even know existed. So, okay, fine. I'm sitting next to the NOC guy. The NOC guy's like, oh my God, we just lost this site. I'm like, did you just do anything? I'm like, well, here's my last batch of commands. Okay, this one switch was in this one that's down. We have a test lab. Can you recreate what you did on this test lab? So I recreate the test lab. The switch crashes reliably. Okay, do you have the site schematics by any chance? So, well, actually, we do. So they've been having random crashes of this industrial control facility for ages. And they couldn't figure out why. They had engineers in. So in SCADA, you basically have, if you're doing things properly, you have a management side and you have a supervisory side. On the supervisory side, you can make all the changes. The management side is purely monitoring. You can't do any actual changes of the industrial control environment. Okay, no worries. There's this UPS connected on the management side, not on the supervisory side, and the switch connected the two for heart beating purposes. Now, when that switch went down, it stopped heartbeat between the two UPSs. The entire system went down, caused emergency shutdown. And they couldn't inject gas into the grid, took them time to go spin things back up. There was a dollar cost that was mildly astronomical, but okay, no worries. So I pointed out this error. We've had engineers who literally missed this. We've been paying them ridiculous amounts. Obviously don't do this again. And we'll go schedule a proper outage during our next batch of downtime and we'll go remediate this. And so they eventually did. They were very happy. They hired us back next year and the year after that and the year after that. Incidentally, this is the one client that I absolutely loved having because they implemented every single recommendation I made as a pen tester. So when I went back in the next day, we have this whole saying where I don't get lunch till I get domain admin. Well, I didn't eat the entire week because I couldn't get DA. So they're graduated up to our adversary services program and they've been happy with us ever since. But there was that moment of you're gonna make a mistake in IT. Everyone's human. How you deal with that mistake in the moment is what separates a professional from a newbie. If I'd have hit it, but completely against my ethics, it would not have been good for me or the client. But if you make a mistake, own it. Here's how I'm going to fix it. Or, hey, how can we work together to fix this? That's the whole consulting skills. And that just takes time and practice to learn.
Yeah. And I'm guessing you were doing a few breathing exercises that day yourself.
Oh, yeah. I was breathing. I mean, because you never want to freak out in front of a client. You need to be calm, cool, collected. If you need to go freak out, go for a walk around the block far away from the smoking area and go scream to avoid somewhere in a public restroom or something far from where they can hear you, but don't freak out in front of the client. That's the worst thing you can do. If you're freaked out, they're going to get freaked out. The situation's going to escalate and it's basically the end of the world.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned as well was, you work with the client and you were able to reproduce this in a test lab. And this is one of the difference between maybe a newbie and a professional is documenting the steps that you're going through, making sure you know exactly what you've done, exactly what you've touched, where you've done things. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the importance of having a process for doing these things.
Well, everyone has their own different process. So I like to try and document as I'm going along. And they're just raw notes, screenshots. Like I'm constantly taking screenshots as I do things. But we say the hacking is free. The report costs money. People get hacked all day long. The question is, are you getting a copy of the pen test report? I'd hack for free happily all day long. It's the processing, the deal with people, the writing the report, the making sure that what you're communicating is not just accessible to a technical person, but even the executive summaries of why this is important. Because there's really a couple types of companies that hire pen tests. There's those that genuinely want to change, and there's those that just want to check box for the compliance. The fun challenge, to be honest, is converting clients who just want to check box into those who want a real pen test for change. It's a very interesting world in that. I mean, like, no company in this world is in the business of being cyber secure. They're in the business of making money, making widgets, doing things, executing functions. Now, if they're insecure, then they can't make money either because clients won't work with them or they can't put out the function if they get hacked. It's translating cybersecurity risk into business risk is the one skill that I think is missing a lot out in the world. What separates a good pen test from a bad pen test.
Sure. It's one of the reoccurring themes when we talk to people on the podcast that, you can be technically the best at breaking into systems in the world, but if you can't communicate that to a client, can't communicate that, especially to maybe less technical stakeholders as to why that's important for their business and why this actually matters, then like you say, you come back the next year, you have exactly the same findings, they accept the risk, and you get in this awful loop where neither side is really getting value out of it. It's just a monetary tick box thing.
Exactly. Let's try to get into some password cracking, right? I mean, last year we had a stat was that 30-40% of all breaches were because someone logged on to a site with a password that was reused from a different site. Like it was easy, low impact, high impact, but low effort wins for me that got me in this. I may not be the smartest person in the world, but at least I can communicate the risk. And that's what's gotten me where I am today.
Yeah, we'll dive into the password thing because I think there's some really interesting things with the way that the security landscape is shifting and actually catching up to a lot of things that you've been talking about for 20 or so years now around, password security and identity security in general. Just thinking about it from the other side, so we've talked about kind of the red team in the offensive side. you've obviously been in situations where you're protecting organizations, you're on the blue team, you're dealing with this with maybe very limited resources. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the situations. I know you've had to do DDoS defense with very limited
Oh,
resources.
yeah. That was fun. So we're talking back in 2007-ish. So one of the major worms, I can't even remember which one at the time, but there was a worm that was spreading via either SMTP or SMB. And I was working a large global knock. And so how it was funny was the day shift guys normally didn't get read-write access. They were level ones. They could just do log on monitoring. The night shift guys got the read-write, or guys and gals and people, etc., got the read-write. And so we had to do all the changes. And so I'd get these tickets of, hey, it's an absolute emergency. We need to go implement, 1,000+ ACLs all across this network without impacting live traffic. And so at the time, all we had was Telnet because a lot of places weren't using SSH at the time. We had to use expect for a lot of stuff. So here I am writing these scripts in Perl, a little bit of Bash, some expect, and then using awk and things to pre-write the ACL out, and then doing mass deployments. It was an exercise. But we got recovery done in 3-4 hours of here's all the isolations, and you're killing a worm in real time like that it's a skill set. The other fun one we had to do was, I bet sometimes network engineers would create a situation where they'd lock themselves out of TACACS. And so either the shared secret was wrong, but it was still linking up. For those who don't know, TACACS is the Cisco access control technology, very similar to Radius, used for authorization, authentication, and accounting. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to black hole the TACACS server from the Cisco switch, and then we'd be able to use the local accounts that we used via this Type 7. We decode the local accounts based off the config backups, log on, fix all the authentication commands that were set up because someone entered an authorization wrong or whatever else. We'd then unblack hole the TACACS server upstream, all without cutting your legs out from underneath you. So you get really good at network gymnastics of working around these, because if you lock yourself out, the only way in is via the modem bank, which most people even have modem banks these days. You dial into this console server with 16 aux ports, find the right system, and log in at 9600 baud and pray it still works.
Yeah, well, I think this is, the interesting thing for you, that your passion's clearly been around, you mentioned passwords, but also authentication, and actually looking into the creative ways around fixing issues and the way these things work. And I feel like a lot of the things that you've been looking at and researching for the past decades have really come into spotlight in recent years, where as an industry, we've started to focus on identity security. It's kind of a big buzzword now that everything's moving towards that. And there's all these creative ways now in which attackers are not writing malware, not writing exploits. They're simply compromising credentials and access in different ways. So broadly, what's your take on today's threat landscape and where we're at?
I mean, the threat landscape really hasn't changed much. Well, it has. In the old days, hackers used to log on just to go deface websites. And then bad people would go log on to implement ransomware, try and lock out machines. Now it's all about economic espionage and that level. You're reselling information. Why encrypt when you can just go steal data and sell it, or stealing cryptocurrencies. But realistically, shared passwords have been a problem as long as I can remember. The thing is, you as a consumer will never know if a site's storing your password securely. They could be storing it in MD5, MD4. They could be storing it in clear text, as happens during some of these breaches. And so the difference of using, say MD4, MD5, SHA-1 compared to, say, something like bcrypt with a cost of 12 is ever from a couple hundred gigahashes per second on a single video card dropping down to 10,000 hashes per second. Like, it's magnitudes difference in terms of speed. So attackers will go steal an environment, break in, grab credentials, go log on. The cool part now is the defenses are catching up. We have a number of things that are making things a lot harder. So the old days, authentication systems were never connected. When I say connected, now you got technologies where your authentication platforms talk to each other via central backend. Like IBM has some products which I won't name, but we have a couple awesome tools for detecting things like impossible travel. So you log on to a system in Calgary, and all of a sudden you're logging on 5 minutes later in a system from Tokyo. That's impossible if it's within 5 minutes. No one travels that fast. So you can write detection rules and even prevention rules to go block that. There's also things like password denial listing is now built into NIST. So, if someone uses a bad password on a password change, we can now detect and stop that in real time. Password managers these days are almost ubiquitous. I have things synchronized to my phone, synchronized to my computer. Even though they might get breached once in a while, it's still far better than having the same password written down everywhere that you can't change. Like with a password manager, I can go change my password across all the systems in an automated fashion and make sure they're completely random. Now, the advice I'm going to give everybody, because I've been saying this before and I'll say it again, I'll go on the world tour if I have to. Any password a human can memorize can be cracked by a machine. I don't care how creative you are. Humans are not that smart. I'm sorry, we're not. So the thing is, the only good password is a long one. Well, and also a random one. Like proper entropy is important. A highly randomly generated, like high entropy password of only 12 characters is actually highly resistant to a password cracker. But because we can't verify entropy, we recommend 14, 20 characters, and completely random. Now, if it's set that way, you don't have to change them that often, except for in case of breaches. Like an Active Directory, I recommend still an annual password change at a minimum, because after every pen test, every time someone's running through, every time a backman leaves, yada, yada, there's a whole list. And the reason for that is Windows, password hashes specifically, like NTLM and the NT hash, are deemed as password equivalent. So you can reuse them. Now, NTLM version 1, NTLM version 2 don't really matter, but the main Windows Active Directory hash can be reused virtually everywhere, no matter how long it is, even if it's 128 characters. But yeah, get a random password manager. Make sure you back up the authentication secrets to your safety deposit box so that if you lose your phone or whatever else, you can recover from, say, a household fire. And just make sure your passwords are changed. Deploy multi-factor authentication, because the password managers will put in the 6-character password for you automatically. Pass keys are now becoming popular, but they're still equivalent to having a long shared secret. They're just much longer. They have to be synchronized and managed much like a password. So, I wouldn't view them as a replacement for MFA, but they are definitely an improvement. So that combined with strong MFA, it's basically stopping a large number of attacks, then combined in with these back-end systems of detecting possible travel, locking out accounts, increased monitoring. It's making things much better.
One of the interesting things that I've heard you touch on this as well is there's kind of this false boundary that a lot of organizations set up where they assume that we have our corporate accounts and we have users, and users will also have personal accounts, but they had absolutely nothing to do with corporate systems. And of course, then the user logs into Chrome and syncs their passwords across, or then they use a easy to remember password and all these kind of things. And you're a real advocate for actually organizations helping people out with their personal password management and doing that kind of thing. Could you just talk to us a little bit about what your thoughts are on that boundary between personal and corporate and how that should be handled?
Yeah, so I mean, the boundary between personal and corporate went away a long time ago, even before COVID hit. Work from home became a big thing. People have gone on to do BYOD by sharing their systems between, even those that don't have like shared systems. People will, say they'll log on to their local library, have the same password and email address as they would, say, their corporate environment, or people, have the same password on a breach of a major social media site. There's ways of synchronizing up who has what passwords, and people will try them. And there's a whole automated ecosystem behind that. So regardless of whether people think they should be completely separate, reality is much different. Which means some of these password managing companies, like I'll name a brand, 1Password. When you buy an enterprise subscription, it also includes a subscription for all of your employees to use personally. And when you leave the company, you just give them a credit card and your personal account stays separate from your enterprise. I use it for my entire family. I'm a huge advocate of literally everybody who will listen. The number one control you can do is deploy a password manager. Now, this is also handy for, like, I wish every company would give someone a cell phone, because then you can store your password right on your cell phone for logging on. It would also reduce password reset times. It reduces other issues for getting onto your systems. I'm not going to remember a 15-character password. I'm sorry, I'm smart, but I'm not superhuman. And I guarantee you're not going to be able to either. I don't care who you are. So this is the thing. Security controls should be there to reduce friction. Businesses are remarkably adept at routing around what they perceive as damage to get the job done. So if I make the control a pain to operate, people start going back to sticky notes on their desks or writing them down. So I'd much rather synchronize them, make them easy to operate, and then people are going to do the right thing so they can get on to doing what they do best, making money.
And on the technology side of things as well, you mentioned, there's some of the challenges of hashes are basically password equivalents. But if we think of like the current landscape and where it's going as we see attackers more target SAML and actually IDPs themselves, what do you think organizations need to be doing more of?
Well, if you look at SAML and OIDC, for example, protecting certificate authorities that sign those secrets, protecting the certificates themselves on the SAML servers. The biggest thing I hate in this industry right now is there's only one or two good companies that write good certificate rotation software. Been doing this long enough. Try to replace 400 SSL certificates across load balancers all at one shot. It's an absolute nightmare. I think we need to do better at making automatic certificate rotation easier. I know things like Acme make it easier, but certificates and authentication secrets in general should be a lot better at automatic rotation, and I think that should be our next major focus. And I know some companies make big money off selling those software, and I applaud them because capitalism's awesome. However, I think we should make open source versions that are good for smaller shops and make it easier for everybody. If I can't push a button and rotate every cert across the enterprise and do it for free and or cheap, we're failing as an industry.
Yeah, it's one of those things. There's the report out against some issues that Microsoft had, I think last year that I was reading. And it was talking about a secret that, certificate that hadn't been rotated. And because in the past they tried to rotate it, it had gone wrong. So someone had stopped rotating things and it had just been left and it'd been, not rotated when it should have been. And then it'd been compromised at some point, and then that led to the issue. So it's not, if Microsoft can't handle these things, then everyone can't handle these things, right?
Well, and that's exactly it. Like, it's not a question of if you've been breached, it's a question of when. I mean, we joke there's two types of companies in this world: those that have been breached and those that haven't breached and don't know it yet. I mean, the dwell time can be 9 months or so. And those 9 months of that certificate being out in the wild could be some of the most damaging, because you can then forge, you have SAML tickets via golden SAML attacks. You can forge OIDC keys. In fact, that's the big thing that scares me about quantum one of these days. Is people talk about, we're going to go capture data and we're going to go decrypt it later. The thing that scares me the most is when they become actually effective is OpenID Connect and SAML. If you can go interact with that certificate or forge a certificate in real time, that's more damaging. Same with, say, forging a VPN authentication certificate. Like, that's game over to me.
Absolutely. And, we've seen plenty of times the Active Directory certificate services as a way to elevate privilege within environments. That's a easy way in a lot of environments to get your lunch on time, I think, there with that getting into domain admin, start off as a standard user and just a misconfigured template that someone's long forgotten about is the path to privilege there, or just the IDPs themselves.
Yeah. Or my favorite one, NTLM version 1 is still used today to get us DA on almost a monthly basis. I mean, and that thing's, all you have to do is crack 3 DES keys, and that you can do for about $700 in cloud resources. Although I'm finally happy, Microsoft accidentally killed NTLM version 1 in the latest Server 2024 release, and it's not coming back, which means the one technique I've been harping about for years is finally dead.
That's very good news, because actually one of the things I was going to ask you is, we're looking forward at all this technology. Everyone's going, what's the next big thing? But organizations still have one foot stuck in the past with legacy systems, backwards compatibility, all these challenges from things like Landman out there. What are the things that you commonly see when you're working with organizations that they just haven't addressed, that they need to kill off or do something about?
It's NTLM version 1, NTLM version 2, Open Active Directory certificate services, but I'm still running into almost everything having SMB open, signing turned off, no certificate authority deployed, man in the middle 6 using that kind of a technique to go attack IPv6. There's just so much out there. I mean, I'm seeing Cisco Smart Install open, SNMP read-write strings set to private. I joke, usually give a client what I call the $50,000 checklist at the end of every pen test. And it's all the same findings of, switch from PowerShell version 2 to PowerShell version 5, turn on transcription block logging, get rid of all the legacy systems. Why is Windows 7 in the environment? I ran across Windows 2000 the other day in an environment, and I was floored. Like, how is this thing still even running? But then again, there's things like $2 million centrifuges that are run by a computer back in the day. That the whole OT SCADA environment is nothing but legacy systems. And the only thing you can really do is wrap a giant wall around it, because no one's going to replace a $1 million machine tied to a computer's proprietary hardware. So we always say just patch or just upgrade. It's often not, that easy. You need to understand the business reasons behind things to make intelligent recommendations. So yeah, we're going to have these companies stuck in the past, but until there's a real economic incentive to go swap out all of this hardware, if I could solve that, I'd be a millionaire, because I'd solve the entire OT problem.
I think a lot of people wish they could, and it's just something that, again, comes up time and time again in the conversations on this podcast of how do we actually deal with these legacy systems in a pragmatic way? Because again, everyone talks about, we just air gap them, we wall them off, but inevitably at some point someone needs to talk in that environment, someone needs to do something, or we start introducing the IoT, the smart devices, the 5G connections, and someone just drops that in the environment, and suddenly that walled garden is exposed to the internet or the wider world through one vulnerable thing that no one's ever going to patch, ever.
Right. I don't think we're going to solve this before I retire, which is, sad, but also means I have job security. But hey, on the bright side, it's always a new challenge every day.
Well, speaking of retirement, I actually heard you describe yourself as semi-retired from the cracking scene, and you're pleased to see a new generation coming through, which makes you sound a lot older than you actually are. But maybe you could talk to us a little bit about your kind of journey through the cracking scene, and going from building GPU rigs to presumably these days struggling to get GPU parts due to the AI boom. What's that transition been like for you over the years?
It's been very weird. I mean, so, DEF CON's always a zoo, and it's next to impossible to find things. So when I didn't start going to DEF CON until about DEF CON 27 or so, maybe even DEF CON 25. And as I have so many friends now in the community, cracking if you can happens over the same time of DEF CON. It's a solid 48 hours. And I struggle every year to find time to, help out the teams. I used to be their primary pattern analyst, and I used to bring massive amounts of GPUs to the party. And now with the AI boom, I can't even get the GPUs I want most of the time. They're next to impossible. Like, I'm having to find various lower cost countries that we have them in our various cloud environments that I have them free, because the ones in the high cost countries are fully subscribed for production work. Production work, I have no problem getting GPUs, but for spare contest, etc., you're back of the line. You're, please, sir, may I have some more? So the last couple of years, I haven't really done anything on Team Hashcat. So if you look at the comments now, I'm now listed as a retired member as opposed to an active member. If I ever find time to stop running contests and, doing Hacker Jeopardy and all these other events, I'd love to do a good run. I keep telling them we should do Crack If You Can 2 days before DEF CON as opposed to during DEF CON. So those of us who have corporate jobs now, meeting clients, presenting, can actually go find time to go compete. But I mean, that's still the fun of it, though. There's new people coming involved. There's the password cracking village now at DEF CON, where people come up and they learn their first steps, and that's exciting. It's the new generation, like, this is a wicked crossword puzzle. People learning newer techniques. Research stalled for a couple of years there. We all thought it was a solved problem, but even I released a new tool called FingerCut the other day that was a reiteration of how we ran the Combinator fingerprint attack using some Cut B. There's new techniques coming out, and even AI is assisting with this. So there's a technique called stemming and chunking, where we're looking for word components inside passwords. AI ops now are automating that process of finding stems and chunks and some of the pattern analysis. I don't think I can train an AI to password crack. What I can do is train it to go automate certain processes. Like, people are focusing on candidate generation versus now the more important part is automating certain parts of the primitive pipeline makes it a lot easier for this. So I'm very excited to see where it's coming.
I was going to say, what big areas, are there any other big areas that you're excited to see? Because like you say, it stalled, and it seemed to be an area that people weren't as interested in for a while, but the interest really seems to be building again. What is it you're really
It
excited
is.
to see the next generation take on challenge-wise?
Challenge-wise, honestly, autom- a lot of the password cracking resources these days are English, or European-style languages. I'm looking forward to seeing AI detect language patterns in other languages, in particular Japanese. Chinese would be awesome. Like I know those skills exist over in those parts of the world. They haven't made it up to the western side of the world yet. Detecting or removing junk from email lists, things like email addresses. A lot of the word lists that we have out there have a lot of garbage in them, and be able to remove things that aren't passwords, or training an AI to recognize that a password roughly looks like that was human generated, and then iterating on those. And every time we try and automate a password detect pipeline, inevitably it gets polluted with passwords, and the AI trains itself on email addresses and garbage. And so filtering that garbage out and then automating on the known good would actually improve this. Now that large open source LLMs are available, I honestly think LLMs are the best way to do it. And then working on candidate generators, rule generators. I mean, I wrote a automatic rule generator back in 2012. Generated 2.rule was spent over 6 months training 40 plus systems on common password dumps at the time. I'd love to go recreate that once I get my hands on enough GPUs for a good solid couple of months. But I'm looking forward to these new projects coming out.
And if someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, this is an area I've never actually considered to dig into, and actually it sounds, quite fun, where would you say, advise people to get involved or go get started in this area?
So the hardest part is finding legitimate password breaches that aren't contaminated by criminal activity. Um, and so that's the hard part. There are some sites out there that I'm not going to name on air, but there are sites out there with legit breaches that you don't have to pay for. They're completely open sourced. Um, so get some of those breach lists, start working on existing cracks. There's the Haven't Been Pwned project, which releases a lot of their passwords on an open source basis in an NTLM. Try cracking some of those without using the existing word lists that are out there. Go on the Hashcat forums and the Hashcat Discord. The only advice I'm going to give is don't say, help me, I need to go crack a hash. Don't ever post hashes on there, but ask intelligent specific questions without releasing the actual hash, and you'll get a lot of feedback. We get a lot of folks who just chime in and go, help me, I need to unlock a crypto wallet. Here's the link. Yeah. And that's the fastest way to get banned from that forums. Also, don't use Kali for it, because Kali works terrible with Hashcat. Run one of the Ubuntu, Red Hat, major Linux distributions, Windows, even Mac OS works to some extent. Have your drivers up to date, and then just be curious.
Fantastic. And in terms of hardware, I'm assuming, despite the difficulties in getting the right GPUs, it could actually be more accessible than ever due to cloud resources you can tap into, possibly at great expense. But
Community gaming hardware, like my standard, I have an RTX 3080 at the house. You can get those little G1s. You don't need, contrary to popular belief, you don't need insane amounts of horsepower for hash cracking. They're very good for doing long tail style attacks that require a fair bit of grunt, but intelligent password cracking is still the way to go. Like, for example, we used to bring in 400 or 500 GPUs to crack can, and over 70% of our hardware sat idle because we were too busy doing manual attacks with just one or two nodes. So a human behind a keyboard with just a single video card can still absolutely destroy an entire cluster if somebody has no idea what they're doing.
fantastic, yeah. So I think that's great advice to anyone who wants to go, and you may already have that GPU set under your desk at home at the moment, just waiting to be tapped into. So yeah, that's fantastic. We're almost out of time here today, but just wanted to get your take on, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the industry you've worked in these years, and dealing with all kinds of different facets of it, what would you like to change about the industry?
All right, so this is going to sound gatekeeping, so I apologize well in advance. People are jumping straight into cybersecurity without any kind of general IT background, because we have this, we call the pen test puppy mill. Everyone's promising get a great career in cybersecurity. It's people are joining in with no technical background whatsoever. Most of us in cybersecurity that are successful today had a previous career in general IT or were deep technology enthusiasts. So I recommend getting exposure to an enterprise environment, either in change control, network engineering, systems administration, QA, development, understanding how an enterprise or your particular industry works, and then jumping into security via the side door makes you far more effective later on. Getting in initially, yeah, you'll get some success, but eventually you hit this knowledge wall. You'll wind up in a SOC, not disparaging a SOC, but you'll wind up in a SOC working insane hours, much like a NOC, and you won't be able to spend the additional time to learn the side skills to go advance out of the SOC. So learning the engineering skills in a direct engineering environment full time will accelerate your career far faster. That and working on your soft skills. People go into cybersecurity without developing those soft skills, without developing the writing, without developing the presentation skills. So there's this giant pool of talent with, I don't want to call them deficiencies, but deficiencies in either the knowledge or their presentation capabilities. If I could change that and make everyone amazing presenters tomorrow and give them a general IT background, I think our industry would be far better off.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And actually, there's an interesting thing I'm trying to work out where it's going to land. But with things like ChatGPT, is this actually going to be an enabler for people to be able to communicate their ideas better? Or is it just going to be more of the kind of the mill thing that you said, someone just like goes through this very blinkered view and doesn't understand the bigger picture and just churns out reports that are very well communicated, but so narrowly focused that they've missed the bigger picture. And I think,
it's a tunnel vision. If I can get rid of the tunnel vision and have people expand, I mean, my career's gone zigging, zagging all across. And I think those side quests, for lack of a better term, have made me more rounded professional. And one day I may rotate back into the business for a bit, or I might go rotate around, go do something else, then come back into this. That learning never ends, but it's not just all cybersecurity learning. Learning things outside of your scope make you a far better professional.
yeah, absolutely. I do remember talking to a recruiter many years ago when I was building out a research team, and I said the two things I'm looking for are people who've worked on a help desk or people who have home labs, because that, that kind of experience, someone who wants to get stuck in, who has a passion for it and has that broader, knowledge of where things go wrong and how things plug together is really important there.
The other advice I'm going to give everyone is take time for yourself. Burnout is a real thing in this industry, and nature of cybersecurity, you're going to be going through crisis, then calm, and crisis, then calm. And that roller coaster absolutely destroys you mentally. Go out for a walk. Go find an outside hobby. Go out and smell the roses. I wish someone had told me this when I was 20, and even if they did, I probably wouldn't have listened. But now that I'm older, it's far more important to go find something outside of this that can keep you engaged, because when the burnout eventually happens, you need something to fall upon. And if your whole world falls out from underneath you, it's going to be devastating, and you're going to turn to other vices. Get healthy habits now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I work from home and I still have a commute because I go out walking every day just to make sure I've left and, touched grass and seen the outside, because it is very important to keep yourself sane that way. No, absolutely. And before we wrap up, where can people learn more about you, the work you're involved in, or maybe just see posts of your cats on social media? Where can they go find that stuff?
So I'm unfortunately still on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky. So evil_mog on the Twitterverse, evilmog on LinkedIn. And then I have the funniest domain on Blue Sky. I'm mog.evil.af.
There we go. Well, we'll make sure we stick links to that in the podcast description as well. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today on Adventures of Alice and Bob. Big thanks to our guest, Evil Mog, for sharing some of his story with us today, from telemarketing talking to cracking credentials, dealing with floods, fires, and instant response adventures in between all that. As always, thanks to our super producer, Jesse, and the team at BeyondTrust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.